Welcome to Movie Caps. Today I will show you a drama, biography film from 2001 titled A Beautiful Mind. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In 1947 at Princeton University, John Nash is initiated into the mathematics program with the rest of his class. Unlike his colleagues, Nash sits at the back of the room, with his head down, lost in thought. At the luncheon outside afterwards, John is introduced to some of his classmates, Bender, Nielsen, and Saul. Shortly after they are acquainted, Hansen shows up, who makes a quip at Nash as if he were the waiter. Nash retorts with criticisms about Hansen's work and walks away. He enters his dorm for the first time and immediately begins moving the furniture around, namely the desk, which he pushes up against a window that looks out into the courtyard. His roommate, Charles Herman, shows up shortly thereafter, incredibly hungover. They introduce themselves, and Nash tries to get back to work. Frustrated at his roommate's lack of social graces, Herman offers to go up to the roof for a drink to try to break the ice. While on the roof, Nash has a little too much to drink and reveals that people don't usually like him and he doesn't like other people. He's frustrated that he has to waste his time with classes, and thinks he should be spending all of his time working on publishing papers. He makes it clear that he believes he's smarter than everyone else on campus. Nash plays a board game based on mathematics with Hansen in the courtyard and teases him about his lousy work. To counter this, Hansen points out that unlike himself, Nash hasn't published anything yet. Hansen wins the game, throwing Nash off, and as he gets up to leave, he accidentally knocks over the board, deepening his embarrassment. Herman finds Nash in the library, where he's been non-stop for the past 2 days. He's used a grease pencil to mark on the window, dictating different patterns of conflict: men playing football, pigeons competing for food, a woman getting mugged. He insists there's some sort of pattern and he is determined to figure it out. He believes he can figure out how conflict can be resolved without someone having to lose. Herman drags Nash to the pool hall for a break and his other colleagues are there. They talk about the women in attendance and Nielsen tries to set him up with one. Nash goes over to the woman, but doesn't say anything for an uncomfortably long time. Sensing what he's trying to do, the woman suggests Nash buys her a drink. He is rudely blunt and tells her that he doesn't want to play any games and just wants to know what he has to say in order for her to sleep with him. The woman smacks him and walks away. One of Nash's professors has a talk with him about his work. He says he's noticed that Nash has not attended a single class since he arrived, and even though he's spending all of his time working, he hasn't published a single paper. He tells Nash that he's not sure if he will qualify to keep his seat if he doesn't start making some progress. The professor points out a ceremony taking place in the hall, where one of the professors is being ceremoniously given a pen by each of his colleagues to commemorate his achievements. Nash is left to think about this on his own. He goes back to his dorm where he obsesses over his work. His roommate tries to intervene and Nash accidentally smashes his head against the window. The two men get into a fight, ending when Herman takes the desk and shoves it out the window, where it lands in the courtyard. The two then laugh together. Nash goes to the pool hall to work on his paper. His friends drink and marvel at a beautiful blonde woman who has come in with her friends. Nash gets a breakthrough with his work. There is a way for them to all get what they want. He gathers his papers, and runs from the bar, thanking the blonde woman on his way out. Nash returns to his dorm and works through the night until the morning, then turns his paper into his professor, who reads it over and is surprised at his groundbreaking work. He awards Nash with a seat at a mathematics program at the Pentagon working at the Wheeler lab, and he can choose 2 of his colleagues to take with him. Professor suggests that he choose Hansen, but Nash chooses Saul and Bender instead. That night Nash and his colleagues celebrate at the pool hall, and Hansen joins them, although he is hurt that he wasn't chosen. 5 years later at the Pentagon, Nash is brought in to decode some numbers the army has intercepted from the Russians. He spends a long time staring at the wall, and doing all the work in his head. He cracks the code. He explains that they're looking at coordinates and he plots them on a map. He asks about the significance of these coordinates, but is told that the information is classified and leaves, feeling disappointed that he wasn't included more. He then returns to Wheeler Defense Labs and convenes with Saul and Bender. Nash is frustrated he's not doing more important work and that he doesn't seem to be getting as much credit as he deserves. His colleagues dismiss his complaints and remind him that he's late to teach a class to MIT students. When Nash arrives in the classroom, he makes it clear to his students that he thinks the class is a waste of both his and their time. The air conditioning is broken, so the students want to open the windows, but there is construction work outside and Nash says it's more important that he can hear himself talk. One of the students, Alicia, goes over to the window, opens it, and politely asks the construction workers to take a break, to which they happily agree, and she goes around the room opening all the windows. Nash writes a math problem up on the board that he tells the students will take them months to solve, if they can figure it out at all. He then leaves the class. After class, William Purcher confronts Nash and compliments him on his code-breaking abilities. He mentions Nash's lack of personal connection with other people and says that it could be beneficial for the work he has in mind. He takes Nash to a building he had assumed was abandoned, but is filled with workers with high-tech equipment. Purcher increases Nash's security clearance to top secret and shows Nash a video of Russians building an atomic bomb in Berlin. He says they will be detonating them on US soil and that they are communicating coordinates by code in newspapers that they need Nash to break. Purcher implants a radium diode in Nash's arm, showing him a security code that changes over time whenever he needs to drop off his work at a secure location. Purcher sends him on his way with newspapers and magazines to start decoding. Nash is working on this new assignment in his office when Alicia comes in. She tells him that he missed the class he was supposed to teach and that she solved the problem he had put up on the board. He compliments her work but says that her solution is incorrect. Alicia is hurt but charmed by Nash's flattery and asks him if he'll take her to dinner. He agrees and says he will pick her up at 8 on Friday. Nash brings Alicia to a fancy dinner where he poses for photographs with the governor. They walk around and admire the artwork, but he seems to be paying more attention to the people around him than he is to Alicia, and she notices. She asks him to get her a drink and meet her outside instead. On the porch, they look up at the stars and Nash woos Alicia by pointing out different constellations that can make up any shape, animal, or object she can think of. Back in his office, he begins to crack the code in the papers and tears apart several articles to put together. He seals them in an envelope and then delivers them to a large house behind a gate. He uses the code implanted in his arm to go through the gate and drops the envelope into a mailbox. On his way out, he starts to get paranoid of being followed. Nash has a picnic date with Alicia and he confides in her that he is usually very direct and people don't take it very well. She invites him to be direct with her and he tells her that he wants to sleep with her as soon as possible. He expects a bad reaction, but she kisses him instead. In the courtyard, a little girl approaches Nash and asks him about his work. He sees Herman and he introduces the little girl as his niece, Marcy. He explains that he takes care of her now that his sister died in a drunk driving accident caused by her husband. The two men catch up. Nash tells Herman about Alicia and asks for his advice on whether or not he should marry her. Herman tells him that there's no way to know these things for sure. Nash arrives at a restaurant to meet Alicia for dinner, and he is very late. He apologizes and tries to make up for it by giving her a present for her birthday, a crystal that refracts light and can show every possible color combination. Nash asks her for some kind of proof of a long-term commitment between them and she tells him that she won't be able to prove her love to him, but she agrees to marry him instead. The two get married and Purcher watches the ceremony from inside his car. Nash goes to drop off another envelope of his work, but Purcher pulls in and tells him to get in the car and that they're being followed. The drop-off site has been compromised. They are chased by another car whose passengers shoot at them. Purcher shoots as he drives, killing the driver and the car following them drives off a cliff and into the water. Nash returns home to Alicia, shaken up, and she asks him where he's been. He locks himself in the bedroom and refuses to speak to her. During one of his classes, he looks out the window and decides to leave, obviously growing paranoid that someone is following him. Purcher meets up with him and Nash tells him that he didn't sign up for this part of the job. He says he has to protect Alicia and that she's pregnant and he doesn't want to do the work anymore. Purcher threatens to release his identity to the Russians if Nash quits. Alicia catches Nash looking out the window again at night and he tells her she needs to pack her things and go stay at her sister's house. Alicia is very upset and makes a phone call, while he goes back to looking out the window. The next day Nash goes to give a guest lecture and Herman and Marcy meet him in the courtyard. He tells Herman that he's gotten himself into some trouble he doesn't know how to get out of and he needs his help. Nash gives a poor lecture and becomes erratic when he sees men in black suits come in. They start walking towards him and he runs from the lecture hall and out into the courtyard. The men corner him on the stairs and restrain him. He calls for help, saying he's being abducted by Russians, but no one does anything but watch. They give him sedatives and put him in the back of a car. Nash wakes up tied to a chair and a man introduces himself as Dr. Rosen. He tells Nash that he is at the MacArthur Psychiatric Hospital. Nash is in denial and starts to pitch a fit. He falls over onto the floor and sees Herman sitting in a chair in the corner. Nash yells at him, assuming Herman set him up to get caught, and Rosen tries to tell him that there's no one else in the room with them. Nash gets hysterical and is given more sedatives. Alicia visits the hospital to talk to Rosen and he tells her that Nash is schizophrenic. His illness has gone untreated for a long time and his hallucinations may have begun in grad school. Alicia insists it would make sense for him to be paranoid since he works with conspiracies. Rosen tells her that Nash's old roommate, Herman, doesn't exist, that the records at Princeton show that Nash lived alone. Rosen wants to talk to Purcher about Nash's work, but he doesn't have the security clearance and wants Alicia's help getting it. Alicia visits Wheeler with Bender and Saul and goes to see Nash's office. The walls are covered with ripped-out newspaper articles and marked with strings attaching different papers. They admit to her that they figured it was unlikely he would be given an assignment like this. They take Alicia to the house Nash has been dropping his papers off at, and she sees that it's abandoned and run down. The gate doesn't shut, and she reaches into the mailbox and retrieves all of the work Nash has been dropping off there. Alicia goes to see him at the hospital. He tells her that he wants to tell her everything that's been going on so she can try to help him get out and continue his work. Alicia tries to tell him that he's sick and no one is after him, but he doesn't believe her. She shows him all of the envelopes she got from the mailbox and tells him that Purcher doesn't exist. Nash gets upset and leaves the visitation room. Rosen is called to Nash's cell when guards catch him digging in his arm. He explains he was going to try to take the implant out, but he couldn't find it. The doctors in the hospital take Nash to a room where they strap him down to a bed and begin shock treatments. Alicia and Rosen watch from the observation deck. 1 year later, Alicia walks the grounds of Princeton with Saul and he asks how everything is going with Nash. She says he's been taking his medication and doesn't have delusions anymore, but she feels like she's only staying with him out of obligation. She takes Saul back to their house to visit with Nash. He explains that he's working to solve Rieman's hypothesis, and that if he succeeds, he's sure they'll reinstate him. He says that the medication he's taking makes it difficult for him to work and it makes it hard for him to help with the baby. That night, Alicia tries to be physical with Nash, but he isn't in the mood, and he tells her it's because of his medication. She gets up to get water from the bathroom and throws it against the wall. She screams and breaks the mirror and cries by herself. Alicia takes the baby to her mother's house so she can pick up some extra shifts at work. She gives Nash his medication, but after she walks away, he stashes it with other pills in his desk. He looks at the newspaper on the desk and begins to see codes forming in the letters. Someone throws a rock at his window and Nash chases them into the woods behind his house. He is cornered by several men with guns and Purcher reveals himself. Nash tries to tell himself that Purcher isn't real, but Purcher insists that he needs Nash to work for him again and takes him to a shed in the woods. Inside, about a dozen men are working with radios and computers and Purcher gets Nash to agree to start decoding again. He tells Nash that if he starts working for him again, he will get him reinstated at Wheeler. Alicia leaves Nash alone to get the baby ready for a bath while she brings in the laundry. She hears radio noises coming from the shed and she goes inside to find that Nash has been decoding newspapers again. She rushes inside just in time to save the baby from drowning in the bath, and Nash assures her that Herman was watching him. Alicia runs downstairs with the baby and calls Rosen, and Purcher, Herman, and Marcy all try to convince Nash to stop her. Nash tries to prevent Purcher from attacking his wife, but accidentally hurts her instead. She gets in the car with the baby, but Nash stops her from driving away. He tells her he knows that Marcy and the rest aren't real because it's been years and Marcy hasn't aged at all. Rosen meets with them at their house and Nash tells him that he stopped taking his meds because he wasn't able to do math or help with the baby or be intimate with his wife. Rosen suggests he comes back to the hospital for new medication and more shock treatments, but Nash wants to stay home and try to work on fixing his illness. Nash is afraid that if he goes back to the hospital, he will stay there forever, and Alicia lets him stay at the house instead of forcing him back. She says that she believes they can find a way to make it work. 2 months later, Nash visits Hansen in his office at Princeton and asks if he can attend classes and hang around the campus. He and Alicia think that it will help his illness to be in a familiar environment. Hansen agrees and Nash goes to work in the library. Staff tries to keep Nash from entering the library and he has a breakdown while the students watch and make fun of him. Hansen intervenes and explains the situation, but Nash is embarrassed and leaves. That night he explains what happened to Alicia and he says he might need to go back to the hospital, but she convinces him to try again the next day. When he returns to campus, he tells Purcher, Herman, and Marcy that he can't talk to them anymore. He goes to audit a class. Nash continued to work on math in the Princeton library for years. A young student, Toby, recognizes him in the library and they talk about his work together. Toby shows Nash his own work and he is very interested. Nash talks to Hansen about possibly being able to teach a course, and Hansen agrees to talk to the department about it. Years after that, Nash is dismissing one of his classes when he is met by Thomas King, who has come to tell him that he has been considered for a Nobel Prize for his early work in economics. They talk in the dining hall and Nash admits that he still has delusions, but that ignoring them keeps them in control. As they talk, professors come up to Nash and start to give them their pens in appreciation. Nash is awarded the Nobel Prize, and during his speech, he credits all of his success to Alicia. He leaves the ceremony with his wife and son and returns home. The end. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this.